At least 2 explosions have been reported at Kabul airport, killing dozens as the situation in Afghanistan escalates. The Communist Party of China presented a summary of its contributions to the socio-economic development of the country as the political organization celebrates 100 years of existence. The cabinet of Peruvian President Pedro Castillo faces Congress seeking a vote of confidence. From the headquarters of teleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, I'm Katrina Goss. The situation in Afghanistan escalates with 2 blasts attributed to suicide bombers at Kabul airport, which came following warnings from foreign powers intervening in the country. Reports of more blasts are coming in from several foreign correspondents. Dozens are reported to have been killed and over 100 injured. The Pentagon first confirmed a blast outside the Hamid Karzai airport after Western governments warned of a security threat and began halting evacuation flights. A US military official confirmed that at least 1 explosion had occurred at Abbey Gate, a main entry point to the airport, leaving several civilians dead, among them US citizens. Early reports indicated that the explosion was caused by at least 1 suicide bomber wearing an explosive vest. Russia's foreign ministry later confirmed a 2nd explosion in the vicinity. The attacks are being blamed on an ISIS-affiliated group by Western powers and come precisely when several foreign governments were pressuring to keep troops in the country beyond the deadline agreed with the Taliban. Pentagon sources and international media outlets point to the Islamic State affiliate in Afghanistan, known as Islamic State Khorasan Province or ISIS-K, as the prime suspect for the suicide bombings at Kabul airport. AFP news agency reported that the group had claimed responsibility for the deadly bomb attacks. The news is a blow to the Taliban, as it could serve as further justification for ongoing foreign intervention using the justification of a terror threat, as has been repeated for the past 20 years. In a tweet, Taliban spokesman Zabihullah Mujahid condemned the deadly blast outside Kabul airport. The tweet also highlighted that the explosion took place in an area where United States forces are responsible for security. The Taliban does not have control of the Kabul airport, which is being operated by foreign powers, mainly the US. US President Joe Biden offered remarks from the White House Thursday afternoon after the explosions at Kabul's international airport. Biden reported on the US service members killed, calling them heroes. He said the US has an obligation to continue fighting terror. His message to those responsible for today's attacks was, "We will hunt you down and make you pay." Biden sought to lay blame with the Taliban for the situation, despite the fact that the US had intelligence on security threats and is responsible for security at the airport. But he also sought to differentiate between the Taliban and ISIS, which has claimed responsibility for the attacks. Biden also pledged to continue evacuations by the established deadline, and in response to questions from reporters about whether the US should remain on Afghan soil, he laid blame for the swift exit with former President Donald Trump. Our collaborator Bakar Yunus, reporting from neighbouring Pakistan, brings us the latest on the situation in Afghanistan following the explosions at Kabul airport and as the Taliban makes advances in other parts of the country.
Security is collapsing in Kabul, as in the whole of Afghanistan, much more so with today's explosion near Kabul airport, which resulted in several dead and wounded, including US and British soldiers. Therefore, the security situation in Afghanistan is taking a negative and quite complex twist, especially since the US and foreign forces are still responsible for Kabul airport. According to the agreement, these forces will continue in the country until August 31st, making them guilty since they could not prevent the attack that killed many citizens in the area near the airport. These events coincide with Turkey's definite decision to withdraw from Afghanistan and not to stay behind to preserve the security of Kabul airport, despite several previous attempts by Turkish presidency to keep its forces there to manage and maintain security. On the home front, Taliban crowds continue to advance towards the entrances and exits of Panjshir, where Ahmed Massoud and his supporters stand with Afghans who reject both the Taliban government and the agreement signed between the US and the insurgents. The situation is likely to go from bad to worse, exploding further at any moment, especially since neither the Panjshir leadership nor the Taliban is showing any flexibility to reduce the tensions between the two sides.
ninth tropical depression of the 2021 Atlantic hurricane season formed on Thursday in the West Caribbean Sea. It's forecast to become a hurricane in the next 2 days. The storm is set to pass over the Cayman Islands Thursday night before hitting the Isle of Youth in the west of Cuba. By Sunday, the system should be approaching the US northern Gulf Coast. The Cayman Islands and Cuba have already issued tropical storm warnings for locations that could be affected by heavy rains and winds. The storm is moving at around 20 kilometers per hour, with maximum sustained winds of at least 50 kilometers per hour. Due to the heavy rains and floods reported in several states of Venezuela, President Nicolas Maduro signed an emergency decree for 90 days to make available all the necessary resources to attend to those affected by the natural disaster.
I want to sign a decree of emergency for 90 days. Due to the rains, surpluses, we have created these natural disasters in Apure, Bolivar, Yaracuy, Zulia, and Merida. So with this decree that I'm signing, I give the green light for all logistical and financial operations in support of these states. I am signing the emergency decree for 90 days to facilitate all logistical and financial steps. Madam Minister of Finance, the decree is signed, published, executed, and complied.
And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. The Communist Party of China presented a summary of its contributions to the socio-economic development of the country as it continues to celebrate 100 years of existence. The political organisation assured that its main mission is to serve the Chinese people and included in the document a recount of the major transformations that China has undergone up to its consolidation as a world power. The party and the people work together and share good and bad times. There's an inseparable bond between them, reflected the publication. The document also stressed the commitment of the Communist Party of China in advancing toward the entire nation's complete revitalization, assuring the well-being of all citizens. China denounced the extradition case of a senior executive of the communication giant Huawei Technologies, advanced by the US and Canada, as an example of the political persecution of Chinese citizens.
This is an outright political incident. It's in nature a political persecution against Chinese citizens masterminded by the US and carried out by its accomplice Canada, as well as a deliberate suppression of Chinese enterprises. The US and Canada have repeatedly cited laws to justify their persecution of Chinese citizens, but it is clear to the international community that the laws the US and Canada are talking about are nothing more than a tool to suppress dissidents and seek personal gains, and have no justice or legitimacy. China will never accept any forms of political coercion or abuse of justice, and will never allow Chinese citizens to become victims of political persecution by other countries. We solemnly urge the Canadian side to face up to the call for justice from the Chinese government and public, immediately correct its mistake, lift Meng's arbitrary detention, recall the arrest warrant and extradition request, release Meng and ensure her safe return to China.
The Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson also criticised Japan for the lack of sincerity in addressing international concerns over the decision to discharge treated nuclear wastewater from the wrecked Fukushima nuclear power plant into the ocean.
Japan has earlier made the wrong decision to discharge nuclear-contaminated water into the sea despite doubts and objections both in and outside the country. Now it is going further down the wrong path by advancing relevant policies and technical preparations. This shows Japan has absolutely no sincerity to address the concerns of all parties. China urges Japan to take seriously the calls of the international community, neighboring country and its own people, immediately revoke the wrong decision to fulfill its international obligation, and not to start discharging contaminated water before full consultation and agreement with all stakeholders and relevant international agencies.
Production plant has been started up at a Cuban airbase in cooperation with Russian specialists as the country seeks to ensure supplies in the midst of the COVID-19 surge. At the San Antonio de los Baños airbase, the Army has started up 2 oxygen production plants, an effort which Russia has joined with the donation of a plant capable of producing around 120 oxygen cylinders per day. The machinery was installed in record time with the help of Russian technicians. After being packaged, the oxygen cylinders are immediately transported to helicopters and planes that carry them to different parts of the country. This is the latest effort at guaranteeing the availability of medical oxygen in the midst of Cuba's efforts to fight the pandemic.
We are receiving oxygen supply practically for 12 hours a day. We are transporting medical O2 to Santiago de Cuba twice a day, which gives us 12 hours of coverage, and we complete 24 hours. From the National Management Center, we need to continue supplying the medical O2 needed by the Carlos Manuel de Céspedes and the Manzanillo hospitals. We are helping people who have tested positive to COVID-19. There have been so many deaths these days. I am doing my military service in hospital services. It is my duty.
Currently, in the third wave of the pandemic, Guatemala's main hospitals have exceeded their capacity to treat COVID-19 patients in a serious condition. According to Deputy Minister of Hospitals Francisco Coma, the impact is serious as bed capacity is at its maximum. The government official also indicated that the solution does not lie simply in increasing the number of beds, but in managing human resources for each position. For their part, the directors of the San Juan de Dios and Roosevelt General Hospitals in the capital explained that the current situation in emergencies is very complex as COVID-19 care consumes other areas and staff are at the limit.
Related with the presence of 5 different variants of COVID-19 in the country, we could have up to more than 2 million cases by October 11th, which is 4 times higher than on August 23rd.
Australia on Thursday reported more than 1,000 new local coronavirus cases for the first time during the pandemic as the Delta variant fuels a surge in Sydney. New South Wales State, which includes the country's most populous city, Sydney, announced a record of more than 1,000 cases of COVID-19 in the last 24 hours. The latest outbreak that began in the city in mid-June has reached over 15,000 cases and spread to smaller towns and cities, prompting the return of lockdowns and travel restrictions. Despite the soaring figures and growing pressure on hospitals, State Premier Gladys Berejiklian announced a modest easing of restrictions for vaccinated people from mid-September. The nation has recorded almost 40,000 cases and nearly 1,000 deaths to date.
New South Wales reported 1,029 locally acquired cases of COVID in the 24 hours to 8 p.m. last night, and there were 5 overseas cases. We have 698 people admitted to hospital and 116 people in intensive care, 43 who require ventilation.
And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. In Peru, Pedro Castillo's cabinet choices face a vote of confidence in Congress. Chief of Staff Guido Bellido appeared in Congress along with the other members of the executive team, where he outlined the government's plans to lift Peru out of one of the most grave political, social, environmental and health crises of recent decades, and appealed to rival parties to set aside their differences to work together for the nation's well-being. Legislators were set to listen to the proposals of Prime Minister Oscar Motura, who filled the post after the destitution of Hector Bejar, another act that came as a consequence of tensions between the new government and the opposition, which has sought to discredit and remove many officials associated with the left. If lawmakers deny a vote of confidence twice to the same government, the Constitution gives the President the power to dissolve Congress and call new extraordinary parliamentary elections. The government of Guatemala provided free transportation to the first group of Central American asylum seekers deported from the United States to take them back to their countries of origin. The move comes as a result of the collaboration with the National Council for Attention to Migrants and Guatemala's agreements with the US, which continues to pose an anti-immigrant policy at its borders. Authorities claim that the transport provided to help prevent the deportees from being exposed to risks. The governor of the Colombian Department of Magdalena has been forced to abandon the country in the face of death threats from far-right paramilitary groups. Members of Governor Carlos Caicedo's political organisation stressed that the government of President Ivan Duque has done nothing to protect him. The governor's lawyers went before the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights to request protection measures for Castillos, who left Colombia on August 19th after a highly reliable source provided information about a plan to assassinate him. As soon as the threats to the life of the governor and his family became known, graffiti appeared in the streets of the city of Santa Marta, confirming the presence of the paramilitary group in the area.
We are here before the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, accompanying the Colombian Commission of Justice. I am with one of the lawyers who has come to request precautionary measures of protection for the life of the governor, Dr. Carlos Caicedo, who, as has been made public, has once again been the object of death threats, and this time by the criminal organization of the Gulf Clan, and the sectors of the ultra-right who are afraid of losing power, are trying to destabilize the country and have launched a direct threat against the leader of Fuerza Ciudadana, governor of Magdalena, and obviously a national referent. As you know, the department is governed by a progressive. It is the only department that is governed by such a person, as well as the mayor of the city of Santa Marta. We have been accompanying this request as member and spokesperson of the Executive Committee of Fuerza Ciudadana. We have already requested protection from the national government to the state on several occasions. However, they have been unheeded. They have been little heard. The political tensions, the blockade that the national government has on the department and the management of the governor do not make us trust, nor do they make us think that the Colombian state will guarantee the life of the governor.
And we stay in Colombia. While expressing his condemnation of the recent murder of student leader Esteban Mosquera, the rector of the University of Cauca assured that he'd also received several death threats. José Luis Diago Franco confirmed that the security of human rights defenders in the country continues to be compromised. Social movements and human rights organisations have demanded guarantees for social, student, community and trade union leaders in the region, where they continue to be the target of far-right and armed groups. The rector lamented the murder of the 26-year-old student leader, who was gunned down by hired killers a few metres from his home in the La Pampa neighbourhood of Popayan.
Indeed, before being a leader, Esteban was a very dear friend, a person who listened to advice, and had a very promising future in human rights defensorship. The dark forces did not steal them. He will always be a brother and a hope for life. I'm very sad, not as a dean, but as José Luis Diago. It is a very hard loss.
Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel on Wednesday held a meeting with Carlos Lasso, leader of the Bridges of Love project, which advocates the lifting of the US blockade and sanctions and friendly relations between the peoples of the two countries. On his Twitter account, the president described the meeting as fruitful and said that Cuba would continue to strengthen its relations with Cuban citizens who reside abroad. Heading the Bridges of Love project, Carlos Lasso arrived at the White House in July, where he delivered a petition signed by over 20,000 people calling on US President Joe Biden to lift the blockade against Cuba. The project also fosters solidarity with Cuba from the US and is committed to continue campaigning for the normalization of diplomatic relations in benefit of the two peoples. And we've come to the end of this news brief. Remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also follow us on social media for all the latest news. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram. For Telesur English, I'm Katrina Goss. Thank you for watching.